Hi, I'm Tonerra, the host of the Business Talk Library, and today I have a great guest on. And I was, as many of you know, I spend a decent amount of time connecting with people, having guests on. And when I started looking at Dr. Diane's background, one of the things that I noticed is it's like, this is a very dynamic woman that is doing a lot of great things. So I wanted to bring her on the show to talk a little bit about her story, just her journey as a founder and a CEO, and the great things that she's doing. So, Dr. Diane Hamilton, thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be great.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, before we jump into talking about your business and your journey, what was your background before you started, your current business?
Well, that's the good thing about getting older. You've done a lot, a lot of things, and I've done a lot of things. Before becoming a curiosity and perception expert that I am now, working for Tonerra and Dima Innovations, the companies where I founded. And I actually had decades of sales experience. So I've worked in everything from computer software sales in the 80s through pharmaceuticals and lending and real estate and different industries where a lot of sales focus. Before I got into teaching, when I ended up getting my PhD, I wrote my doctoral dissertation on emotional intelligence, and sales performance was interesting to me. So that got me interested in assessments, that type of behavioral analysis. And I'd done a lot of book writing in the area of personality assessments and that in my early writing. In fact, I wrote one of my books with my daughter many years ago about personality assessments. But after I got more into teaching, I've taught more than 1,000 business courses. And so that led to me becoming a program chair at the Forbes School of Business and Technology, and loved doing that. But when I left doing that, I went to do more of my consulting and speaking business. And that's when I started started my radio show, my nationally syndicated radio show, where I've interviewed more than 1,000 people and got so much information from them that I thought, well, this is really interesting because the really successful people were super curious. And I kept seeing that because I'd interview people like Steve Forbes or billionaires, Ken Fisher or, so many different people, Craig from Craigslist or whoever has been on my show. And you start talking to them and you go, wow, this guy's super curious. And I love that. And I thought, well, it's time to write another book. I'll write about curiosity. And because I was always a super curious person. And I noticed some of my students weren't as curious. They kind of wanted you to give them the fish instead of teach them to fish. And I thought, well, I want them to want to learn to fish. So I started to write this book, Cracking the Curiosity Code, about curiosity. And as I started to write it, I thought, well, it's not enough just to write the book. I want to fix this, right? I want to help people become more curious. So I started to look for the assessments of what's out there that helps you develop your curiosity. And really, all the assessments were telling you if you had high or low levels of curiosity. And I'm like, okay, but if I'm low, then what do I do? And I didn't like that. So I created the Curiosity Code Index, which is the first and only assessment that determines the things that keep you from being curious. And that's why that got recognized by Thinkers 50. Radar is one of the top innovations to watch in 2020. And it's a real honor to be included with people like, Harvard professors and all the great people around the world who've done all these amazing things. So that's kind of my backstory, and that's where I am now.
Gotcha. No, I think that is amazing because, when you think about, the curiosity, well, I guess, play on words. I'm curious to know,
Uh-huh.
did you find any trends as to, I guess, what makes people not value curiosity as much as, you did as you started to learn about it?
It was really interesting to me because if you look at curiosity, it's really close to creativity in terms of what you see as the peaks and valleys of it. We all start off like this really super highly creative, curious kid. And around age 5, we hit the top and then we tank. And so, there's great TED Talks. Sir Ken Robinson and George Land have 2 really good talks about creativity, but they're very similar to what I found with curiosity. And with Ken Robinson, he talks about how we're educating people out of our competencies, and we focus so much on the science and maths, and sometimes we're missing on some of the artistic kind of creative things. And then George Land talks about how he did research with NASA, and he watched these kids at age 5, they had 98% of them were creative geniuses, but by the time they're 31, 2%. Yeah, I mean, it was just boom, So it's a huge thing. So I took some of the research out there. I followed, I read all of Carol Dweck's book, work on mindset, and Simon Sinek's Finding Your Why, and Daniel Pink's work on Drive. And you look at all these books and all these things, and I thought, okay, well, I learned a lot about curiosity, but I want to figure out what stops people, right? So I started out just initially in LinkedIn, just asking people, how, what keeps you from being curious? And just the reactions I got back, a lot of them were very fear related, which I wasn't surprised, but nobody wants to look stupid, right? Yeah, and nobody wants to be called out as looking like they don't know what they should know. But I thought, well, I need to research this in more depth. And so I hired these psychometric statisticians, and I started to work on some of these questions to develop my own questionnaire to find out what's keeping people from being curious. Because being a PhD, you want to have it a valid instrument. You don't just want to go to LinkedIn and post something. Oh, that's what I found. So I ended up creating my own questionnaire. I did my own psychometric analysis through factor analysis, all the boring stuff nobody wants to hear about. Did all that, and found out that there are 4 things that keep people from being curious. And I use the acronym FATE, F-A-T-E, to remember them. And they're fear, assumptions, which is really the voice in your head, technology, and environment. And I was kind of, I wasn't surprised at all by fear, or even what you tell yourself, that voice, or even environment, that all your friends, family, teachers, everybody you've ever known, social media, whatever, would impact you. The technology was a little surprising, but it was kind of like under an overutilization of it. So fear was very common sense to me, because we're all in meetings and we're going, hey Terrell, why don't you ask the question, because you don't want to ask it. Better Terrell looks stupid, right? I don't want to be the one. So we all have been there, right? And you think about it, you go, I really want to know this, but I'm going to look really bad if I ask it. And a lot of people are held back. Leaders have sometimes scolded you. I have had people say, I asked one guy had asked me to do something. I said, sure, I'd be happy to do that. How do I do that? And he said, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that. Okay, well, that tells me, shut up, you're an idiot. I don't ever want to hear anything. You know what I mean? You think of all the things that goes into your head that's going to keep you from asking questions in the future. And so those are the kinds of things, like we would tell people, don't come to us with problems unless you have solutions. Which sounded good, because you're going, yeah, I'm gonna get rid of all these whiners that are gonna just complain about everything. But some people can recognize problems, but they're not qualified to give you the solutions, and then you don't get it, right? So, so fear can be a really huge impactor, and women tended to have more fear than men in my study, but not a lot. It was really close. And then on assumptions, the things you tell yourself, the last time I asked this, they just gave me more responsibility and didn't pay me. Or the last time I took this subject in class, I hated it. Teacher was boring. It was, we tell ourselves we don't want to do things, and or I'm not smart enough. It's too much work, too much hassle. It's like when I'm in an audience, I give a talk, I'll hold up, I'll go, how heavy is this? When I'm talking about assumptions, and they'll go, 6 ounces, 20 ounces, whatever they guess, and I go, well, it doesn't matter. What matters is how long I hold it. And if I hold it for a minute, no big deal. I'll hold it for an hour, my arm gets tired. I hold it for all day, I become paralyzed. And that's how our thoughts are, right? We need to put the water down eventually, because we get these thoughts that'll keep us from doing things. And it's very overwhelming for a lot of people, this voice in our heads. And I think that one wasn't as surprising to me. And then technology, of course, some of us rely so much on Siri or so much on the different devices. And we might be the greatest mathematicians and geniuses in the world if we were taught the foundations behind things. But if you're only thrown a calculator and you never knew where that came from, So we need that. We need to focus on how can we build this behind the scenes knowledge. And then once we have the technology, how can we utilize it best and not become overwhelmed to go, I just learned that 4.0. Now I don't want to learn 5.0 or, and then the fear of technology, there's an overlap sometimes on some of these, right?
Yeah.
So, and then the last one, environment. It just ties into a lot of what Ken Robinson and George Land and Sir Ken Robinson had said about how we could be educating ourselves out of our competencies if teachers don't answer our questions or teach the test, or if our family says, hey, you got to be a lawyer, everybody's a lawyer, and you're stuck being a lawyer. And you don't want to be, maybe, so there's the guy who said, don't come to me with problems unless you have solutions, might have been my last boss, but Terrell, you're my now boss. You don't know that I had that experience. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just sitting there not coming to you with any problems because you don't want me to. I'm thinking, right? So that's my assumption. Again, we're overlapping a little bit. So it was really interesting that, technology, men and women were kind of the same. Assumptions, men more impacted, and environment, men more impacted. But the men and women discussion is kind of interesting because I've seen other studies where, men are more likely to 2.5 times more likely to ask questions after watching a presentation than women. They don't need to have a whole bunch of people asking questions for them to put their hand up. Women want to hear like 15 questions before they put their hand up, So we're different. And that a lot of that is what I tied into my research for my next book on perception. And it ties into, how we are different and how curiosity plays into that. But that's my long-winded answer to what holds us back.
No, I think that there is a ton of value that, because even I think about that for myself. My background is accounting and finance. So in working with, different companies, my clients, a lot of times there are things that I know that people don't understand. And early on, I would just, sit back like, why aren't they asking questions about this? And, it makes so much sense. They didn't want to look bad because they felt like, hey, I'm a business owner. I should already know that answer, or I'm an executive, so I should already know. And it really started me down. I think what you said helps validate something. Like I started down a path of like, how do I start breaking this stuff down in trainings, like to give people that they can go on their own, in their own privacy, to start breaking down some of these concepts. So the next time they hear it, they don't have to go through that embarrassment. So no, what you said makes a ton of sense.
Well, it is an interesting thing when you're teaching people because they really love this, to train in this area, because we do a lot of, I did a lot of assessments with like Myers-Briggs and DISC and all that stuff. And I love that. It's fun. You get to learn a lot about not so much what you are as much as what other people are, so that you can learn to work together. But I didn't want to build something that just categorized people. I wanted to give you something more like emotional intelligence test or an engagement test that'll give you like, here's where you are and here's how to fix it and here's how you can progress. And so when we talk to organizations about this, it's everybody has so much fun because it all ties in to innovation and it all ties into engagement. And it's like baking a cake to me. Here's my analogy. All right. So let's say you want to bake a cake and your end product is cake, right? So you have all these ingredients that you want to put into this cake, like oil and flour and eggs and whatever. And you mix them together, you put them in the pan, you put it in the oven, you're hoping for cake, right? But if you didn't turn on the oven, you don't get cake, you get goo, you don't get what you want, right? So in the working world, if our end product is productivity and money, that's our cake. Our ingredients, we know, are engagement, innovation, drive, motivation, leadership, critical thinking, and you name it. All the ingredients, there's a million of them, right? You mix it together, you put it in the oven, nobody's turning on the oven. And the oven, the spark, is curiosity. And I've had so many experts on my show, from Francesca Gino from Harvard, who did the great piece on HBR about the case for curiosity, to Daniel Goleman, the expert for emotional intelligence, who wrote all the books. I mean, you name it, I've interviewed them about this. And no matter what they are, if they're an emotional intelligence expert, an innovation expert, engagement expert, they all say curiosity comes first. It's the spark. And yet nobody's turning on the oven. And the reason that they aren't is they didn't know what stopped it. So I finally found out what stops it so that we can learn. We know how to plug it in now. So that's a big step.
Awesome, awesome. And which, brings me to, you mentioned about the book, Cracking the Code on Curiosity.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Where can people get a copy of the book?
Well, it's wherever books are sold. Some it's easiest probably on Amazon, or you can get it through my site at drdianehamilton.com or curiositycode.com. But it's just about anywhere. It's cracking the curiosity code, and it's the curiosity code index is also available at curiositycode.com. Or you could follow all my stuff, like Dr. Diane Hamilton, on all the social media sites and find me somehow. It's hard to miss me because of all the shows and everything I do. But there's a lot of great content on my site, though.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Dr. Diane, before we wrap up, one question that I like to ask every guest that comes on is, when you think about, your specialty, and you think about, the journey that you've been on, discovering and researching and understanding curiosity, the processes, the roadblocks, and also the tools that can help people, rekindle that. What are two pieces of advice that you would share with other business owners?
I think that a lot of business owners go in it by themselves and they don't realize that they need mentorship. I think it's really critical to find somebody who's done what you're trying to do. Don't be the smartest person in the room. Find somebody who's smarter than you are, and then you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think that is critical to developing a very successful business. Actually, right before I came on this show, I'm teaching a course at one of my universities where I work with students and developing their business plan to get them off under their new venture as an entrepreneur. And I think a lot of them want to just start from scratch and don't recognize that a lot of what they're trying to do, you can get bits and pieces from other people who've already done it. So look for mentorship, look for people who are smarter. A lot of people are looking to give back. I'm a board of advisor on a lot of things like DocuSign and different companies, but one of them is Global Mentor Network. And I think you're going to see a lot more mentoring opportunities and discussions in the coming years. So that would be the number one thing I think we should think about. And I think being proactive, I mean, obviously curiosity is my number one thing, but since I've already used that, I think we've all read Stephen Covey's Habits, and I think the 7 habits are huge, but I think being proactive right now, it ties into being adaptable and agile and all the words that we're hearing, right? And that is so critical to our success. One of the courses I used to teach was this foresight course where we began with the end of the universe in mind and worked backwards to now, and it seemed kind of strange, but then you start to think, if you can think ahead, if we knew COVID was coming, if we knew all these things were coming, and we knew and we really planned in case certain things would happen, you'd have the ability to pivot and be more agile. And so I think just really being proactive and considering what alternatives there are, and that requires curiosity. Again, the spark to that is to ask the questions. What could happen? What can we do if it does happen? So be curious.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Diane, thank you so much for coming on the show, for
Welcome.
sharing your wisdom, giving us more insight about the book, because I definitely think that curiosity is a phenomenal asset that I don't think a lot of people are really mastering or even, tapping into. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, you're welcome. This was a lot of fun. Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to the Business Talk Library. If you like our content, be sure to follow us on social media. And if you want to see more of our exclusive content, you can subscribe and become a member on patreon.com/Business Talk Library. Hey, the Business Talk Library is the place where business makes sense.